Hello, I'm Deborah Malone, founder of The Internationalist and host of Internationalist Marketing TV. Today's guest is Adam Benaroya, who has led media excellence practices at companies like Hewlett Packard Enterprise, Johnson & Johnson, and Kenvue. Adam, what a pleasure to see you again, even if it's virtually. It is always a joy to hear your views on media and also just to see how you're developing in your career, and it's just a joy. So
Likewise.
welcome
Thank you.
to the
Thank
show.
you. Thanks for
Yeah.
having me.
Oh yes, listen, we've known you a long time, and I was so pleased to see you as an Internationalist of the Year this year. So why don't we start with talking about some of the concepts that got you there, which is you've become quite an outspoken advocate for what you're calling strategic simplification in media, which is essentially doing less to achieve more. Why do you think modern marketing or modern media has drifted toward unnecessary complexity? And what does it take? And you would know this better than anyone. What does it take inside an organization to shift the culture back toward clarity and impact?
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, I've been excited about this theme. It's something that I've been building up of my reaction to, how the industry operates and how, marketers operate. Yeah, I think simply it's a mix of external industry factors, but I think what's fascinating to me is just kind of looking at myself, looking at the human factors of why do we make the decisions that we do. Starting with the industry, of course, the complexity is there largely because it helps the industry profit. Stakeholders with different incentives across the supply chain, the complexity makes it easier to profit at various points. And then, yeah, I think the industry is always, in a good way too, celebrated the complexity, the volume of innovation and companies that are playing in the data-driven marketing space. There's just a lot of complexity based on, isolating how do you partner with different parts of, new partners coming in, established partners. And like I said, the internal, the kind of the human factor. And again, this is as much of a reaction to, my introspection of how I've seen myself operate, leading new capabilities, leading new testing. It's fun. It's where I like to spend my time because it's, what keeps us excited to work in this industry. I think there's inherently a culture of self-promotion as well. And when we're talking externally to the industry, we want to showcase what did you do that was new? And, I think that also, in some ways we celebrate that complexity of how we done that's new versus just the basics. And yeah, I think in whole of the industry, partially based on how it needs to profit in the various parts, they would have us believe as marketers that we have to keep up with all of the sophistication to do our jobs well. So what does it take, to your second point, to shift the culture back and bring it to impact? Yeah, it's the basics. First being clear on what are the business objectives that we are here to drive. What matters? How are we going to measure impact? And then grounding every decision back to that so that we are clear every potential capability, sophistication, we know how it's going to be measured against. And then, apply that mindset to any capability roadmap. For us, we looked at our audience and data strategy, our programmatic and media supply optimization. How can we simplify that? How we think about media planning in general. How can we, in ways, simplify our channel mix and how we put plans together? And then just overall, of course, we want to test and learn, but bring some rigor to that. How are we going to scale it? What's important versus what's noise in testing? And then just acknowledging this natural tension between simplicity and complexity. Yeah, and where can we celebrate, simplicity and what we're doing as well, not just the new innovation, inherently some of the complexity.
You bring up a word that I've been hearing a lot of, and it's basics. Someone that I interviewed not too long ago, someone who I admire greatly, a CMO, talked about the need to get back to brilliant basics. And I
Yeah,
also, yeah, I mean, it's amazing. And I also noticed that, and I think he said it because he said brilliant basics so that we're not always, and God knows we've heard this forever, so we're not always distracted by the shiny objects.
right.
But I've also, even at A&A Masters, there were a number of speakers that really talked about getting back to brand building for sure, but also the thinking through the basics. It doesn't mean that that dulls innovation or that it dulls creativity,
Right.
but it certainly seems to be a little bit of a movement that we're seeing in the industry. But just let me, you've also suggested that the layers of data and dashboards and tech can actually work against marketers' ability to drive profitable growth. Now that I think is pretty provocative. You want to elaborate on what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think of course, we want to have data, we want to make informed decisions, but yeah, I think there's so much complexity that that can turn into. Yeah, I think for us, I'll speak on, perhaps measurement, um, a little bit. I think there's so much volume, especially for media, there's so much volume of data, so many different metrics that you can look at that in some ways, yes, I do think it becomes a distraction. One, to build these data warehouse and infrastructures, it's a huge investment, both money and time. And then you're expecting that all of your marketers are using it in some form or fashion. And I've seen in most cases that there's just too much there to really focus individuals on making not just uncovering insights, but actually driving to action. So I would start, grounding your measurement in outcomes that matter. Again, to your brilliant basics. How are we going to measure growth of our brands? And then what is the best class, mechanism to attribute media and marketing investments to that brand outcome and story? I've seen the depth underneath that, like the granularity of media metrics is where there's still, I think, a huge risk. It's gotten better. I still see metrics like click-through rate or cost per click being referenced. Yeah, outside of search, where of course it makes sense. But for display, for video, for social, I still see metrics referred to that may not correlate with business outcomes, and in some ways maybe even can conflict with those outcomes. I think ensuring that we're taking a consumer mindset on how do we want individuals to engage with our brands, not just what's easy to measure. I think social engagement metrics have a risk of even being noise and distraction. Attention has been exciting to see, but I think that also has a risk to be commoditized or gamed to, um, drive profit. Again, something that we've seen with viewability. So I just radically simplify the number of metrics that matter, especially within media. Focus on fundamentals, reach, frequency. Of course, if you have a performance or D2C engine, that inherently brings some clarity to what metrics matter. And of course, the hygiene metrics, governance to make sure that things are on the right track. That's important. But just be clear on what the use of this is and what it's not for. It's not to drive large scale business decisions, and using as few metrics to do that as possible, I think, is important.
But you've spoken about something related to what you've just said, and you've covered a lot of complicated issues in a very short time. But you've also talked about your efforts to transition from pure reach based planning to reach plus relevance as a new model. So that sounds, a little bit more focused to me at least. But what does this shift look like in practice? And why should non-media marketers, maybe in brand or insights or activations, care about this evolution?
Yeah. So I think to me, this is going back to basics as well. It's the reinforcement that we need to take an audience first and growth based mindset to our planning process. And starting again, where can the brand grow? How we think about segmentation, what segments are we going to prioritize? Basics of marketing, how are we going to deliver that growth? Um, and have that fundamental established quite well before you get into the media planning process. Because from there, once that's defined and there's a clear brand growth strategy, then it becomes fairly straightforward. What type of, what reach based but budget sufficiency do we need to reach enough of those consumers to drive that growth? And the relevance part, not to say that this is new, but ensure that we're not just doing the fundamentals, but bringing in audience insight, which media can be at the forefront of based on the data that we have of what it means for that brand to be relevant for each of those segments that we're prioritizing. So, maybe a little bit of a biased mindset, but because I think media has that rich audience first data set, it can be that glue that connects as upstream as possible. And that was the new part that we've, been thinking about building out more into, from a process standpoint, so that we're up leveling that audience and human insight that can come from media to that brand growth strategy, to that comm strategy, to ensure that we know what matters to those consumers and what limited, thoughtful number of messages, creative, concepts do we need to build to be relevant to those different segments. So yeah, I think this is, it fundamentally is then moving into the media planning process, but it's much broader than, a media insight and plan as well. And then, going to the, concept of complexity as well. I have There's always a risk that this will turn into a desire to do micro segmentation and all these kind of, granular concepts, but still bringing some simplicity to the activation as well from a data strategy standpoint, from an audience activation standpoint. Um, Going after large enough segments that are, meaningful to deliver reach, but also we can still build that relevant message and, say creative rotation against the different parts of our activation. And again, still trying to make that, that plan and that activation as simple as possible, but still not losing that theme of relevance, which you want to find that right balance.
Yeah, no, hey, relevance is one of my favorite words. I mean, we all need to be we have to be focused, and it's interesting how that translates to so many other areas. Um, let's talk a little bit about something else in the media stratosphere here. And it's retail media, which I guess is really one of the fastest growing marketing investments now with retail media. But you've also flagged some issues around transparency, data quality, and alignment. What should every marketer understand about the real risks, and the relationship dynamics behind retail media? I mean, you've talked about relationship dynamics a little bit, especially when these decisions certainly affect more than the media team in this case, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the starting point, right? That making sure that everyone's clear on how retailers are profiting off of retail media and the importance that retail media plays to, as the growing critical profit center for all of our partners. So, like you said, this integrates into all facets of our relationship, and it's much bigger than a media investment decision. And then, based on that, making sure that because teams obviously sit in multiple facets from media to customer, relationships, that there needs to be clear alignment on what is most important to the relationship and to the business. And that may not be the media investment decision. It hopefully is a balance of both, but that needs to be set first and foremost. And then, yes, as far as some of the risks and the issues, this is a newer space. The retail media platforms and networks are still catching up to some of the capabilities and norms that exist for our other investments and that exist in other ad tech. And yeah, I think the comparison that makes sense to me is, the launch of retail media and retail media tech is quite similar to the first launches of programmatic. And when programmatic first became a thing, yes, there was transparency, but there was also a lot of black box, mechanisms in place. And it took, several years to, for marketers to understand what that looked like and how they need to prepare for understanding the different parts of the programmatic supply chain. And I think that's true in some form or fashion for retail media as well. There's a lot of black box managed service models, and in some cases, it's not clear, where are you paying for actual inventory versus data fees versus overhead if it's a managed service type of model. So that's one point. And then, two, again, it took a while from a brand safety and quality standpoint for, to be clear on how we're measuring programmatic, and that's true for retail media. And in some ways, the retail media, ad tech platforms are still catching up to what types of controls an advertiser can have to ensure that you have the same expectations from a brand safety and quality standpoint. But we're what, a few years in already, and of course the capabilities are catching up, and I think most of those gaps will be addressed sooner than later. And then I think the final point is you want to see this as a convergence versus retail media as a new silo. You want to be able to use that rich retail media data across all facets of your media investment. And of course, you have the retail media networks also selling, you know, Amazon with, Prime as an example. Of course, it's a full funnel type of inventory and strategy that they're trying to sell. So having that transparency so that this can become inherently integrated into the rest of your, national plus retail media buying. As long as, that opportunity is exciting, as long as marketers are clear on what standards they have for other parts of their investment that they want to ensure that the retail media networks are catching up to as well.
And you would think that retail media networks would just make things pretty simple. It's like the metric would be, did you sell more product? And it's interesting again, the structures that have to be put in place. And I think that's part of your argument. Let me ask you something a little bit, a little bit different. Do you think that media now is really being all the thoughts that one has to have about media. Do you think that's being more integrated into the overall marketing and sales picture than it ever has been before? I mean, we used to joke, that media was, the last thing that people kind of got to, but now it really does feel, and maybe it's, the advent of greater digital and performance marketing and everything else, but are you feeling that media is really a key part of how marketers have to think?
Yeah, I think so. Even, it's much broader than the media plan and activation itself, right? And we spoke about a few of the points where the lines have been blurred. Retail media, of course, is a fundamental way that media is now being brought into all of our customer retailer relationships. What we were speaking about from a relevance standpoint. Again, audience insight, comms plan. That's not media fundamentally, but to me, media is that connective tissue that can bring those customer first, human first insights all the way upstream to the brand growth strategy, to the initiation of the comm strategy. So even if you're not working in quote unquote media, understanding how that data is being brought into the insights and planning phase is critical. So you see those branches. Yeah, I think it becomes much broader than just, we're using media as a tool to make informed marketing and customer relationships across the board, on top of the fundamentals of media, of course, which might still be more of that specialty that not everyone has to get, deep into the tactical media plan, but it's not just for the sake of the tactical media plan.
It's interesting that you say that because I'm wondering as we turn to 26, as attention continues to splinter and consumer behavior continues to shift. What does media excellence really mean as we go ahead? Is it skills? Is it mindset? Is it governance? Is it cultural alignment? Is it relevance? Is it all of the above?
I think it's all of the above, and obviously for different org and operating models, what media means might be quite different as far as where the work is being done. But yeah, I think it's a great question because those lines, like we said, they're being blurred. We spoke about retail media, we spoke about that audience first mindset that media can instill through an organization. AI, I think that's another. How do you classify that? Because it intersects so heavily with where media needs to play. For example, how media can inform always on content and search strategy of how we're informing the right information into AI search. So if I had to choose, I mean, yes, there's a skills aspect, although what those skills are will continue to change. Like there's still, those specialist skills that are critical within any type of media capability team. But maybe mindset is a good classifier of what media excellence means. It's how you're kind of bringing that consumer first, human first insight and activation through all facets of marketing. And I think what media can bring is ensuring that the business needs will be clear. That will, the organization at large will bring the business needs and clarity to what the, what that looks like, but ensuring that that's balanced with a consumer first mindset. I think a media excellence org or a set of individuals can perhaps bring that quite well to the organization. And then once that point of view is established of what do we need to do for our consumers, then the more tactical media capability priorities of where you're going to invest your team, that becomes clear as far as what's critical to deliver that type, that experience or that change in behavior or attitudes to into our consumers.
You mentioned two things in your last remarks. One was AI, and of course, we can't have a conversation today without AI. Which I wonder if you're feeling that AI is truly accelerating marketing and media excellence, or do you worry that it's another layer of complexity? And then if we have a moment, I might like to talk about some definitions of media because I think that media can be anything now. It goes beyond what we think of as once was, a publication or a platform or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
But yeah, just answer about AI first. Yeah.
Yeah. Do I think it's accelerating yet? No.
Accelerating any excellence, or is it, or are we still trying to harness how to use it?
I think we're still trying to harness. I mean, I obviously, some marketers are faster to adopt than others, but I think first and foremost, I think there is a lot to be excited about here. I think the potential use cases, even if we haven't all implemented them yet, are quite compelling. Marketing workflows, starting with kind of that basic of how we do work, so much manual process. And I think it's clear how AI can be that driver of not just the automation of that workflow, but how it can bring added value insight throughout the process, and connect teams together where there have been silos in the past. I think also there's just, since digital marketing was a thing, there's been so much data creation and so much not even under leveraged, but just unused data. Let not just for driving insight, but actually seeing that data drive some type of action. And we spoke about it earlier. I think many traditional business intelligence and dashboards, that platforms fail because maybe, perhaps the data quality is not there. And I think AI introduces perhaps some compelling way to move away from that traditional data warehouse and closer to just, bringing that data into some form of insight directly to action. But I think there's very much complex. It's bringing complexity, but I think part of that's just due to the infancy of the space. There's too many potential vendors to work with and partners. So and everyone's excited about this. So every team or individual within an organization has their own ideas of what AI pilot they want to do. So even just organizationally trying to organize all the teams to a cohesive enterprise roadmap of where we're going to prioritize AI use cases. That takes time. You also don't want to stifle progress for individual teams to move faster, but you need to have some of that sense of order, or yes, this will just be a bunch of pilots with these micro outcomes and will lack any ability to bring this to scale. And finally, the fundamentals don't go away. Data quality, having the right metadata and taxonomy. Without that in place, AI will not drive a benefit. So that doesn't go away. So that those fundamentals to ensure that you have the right data, you have clean data, the right data foundation and taxonomy to make sure you have the right granularity of data still has to be a step one, or at least work that most, if not few organizations have fully completed. So there's a lot of work to be done before the exciting use cases can be established. But I think over time this will reduce complexity. I'm optimistic, at least.
Well, and it feeds into your theory nicely about trying to simplify things, but with relevance. I mentioned that media
Yeah.
can be anything today, but you want to just chat about that for a second, or how would you even define media now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the legacy would have, we're typically talking about our paid investment, traditional digital channels. Yeah, I think we spent a lot of work, even just from a financial standpoint. How are we classifying our working media investments? And you had those silos, right? We spoke about retail media. Are you even classifying that in the same, bucket of financial investment, or is it attached to your customer investments? We didn't speak about influencers so much, and of course, it's more of a earned media mindset, but we were trying to bring that into the full, not just from a definition standpoint, but also how we're making investment decisions, not to make quote unquote paid media investment decisions on one side and influencer activations, in a separate, and perhaps retail media in a third. I think those are some of the breaks that we're trying to bring together from an investment decision standpoint. How are we prioritizing across all of this? But I think there's the investment decisions, there's the team organizations, and legacy of who was doing what parts of this has been fragmented across an organization. And of course, the outcome is trying to make this as consumer centric as possible.
Which we should
So
never lose sight of.
yeah, but it's slow for the organization to catch up of how you're building a team that can actually do that in a central way, and that's not always possible. So just at least having that mindset instilled, even if of course, you're going to have multiple teams doing different parts of this, but thinking about what's most important to the consumer and how you're prioritizing across all this and synchronizing your messaging and your creative across all of this is critical.
Misconception about media that you wish all marketers would let go of.
I think one that has always stuck with me, and perhaps this is, my start in the industry from, an analytics mindset. Uh, of course, there's a ton of data, great metrics that in some cases are real time, but the perception that media needs to be managed with real time optimization, I think is a misconception. Of course, I'm, ignoring D2C or really fast paced industries where it makes sense. Um, but yeah, like we said, oversight, governance is critical. Um, but you shouldn't have to optimize your investment in, not even, real time, but in a quick basis, sometimes will not deliver meaningful improvements. And I think the risk is that could actually be detrimental if you're being forced to make those quick optimizations. You may not be actually making them off of the right metrics and the longer term business metrics that take time. And then, I see this from an investment standpoint too, because media can be that real time investment lever. You can put money in, you can pull money out. Inherent, regardless of the direction, it's going to deliver waste if it's done too often. And of course, there's some factors that are unavoidable. It sometimes has to be used as that short-term business lever, but it is wasteful. And there's the process and team waste. And then you also, from a consumer standpoint, we're talking about our brand investments here. You risk building that long-term continuity with your consumers to, shift attitudes and perceptions and behavior. So I think it's a misconception that just because you can use media in this way, like without truly documenting the waste and the risk behind it's a frustrating type of model that you see quite often.
Let's, on a final note, I don't know if this can be a one-word answer or not, but what is one thing that every marketer should know about simplification, even if they never touch media?
Yeah, I think it's going to be similar themes and maybe not a one-word answer. The media ecosystem, the external, factors, it's never going to get simpler. It's going to get more complex and at faster rates than we've seen before. So it's just going to continue to kind of skyrocket. So understanding that external factor and understanding then what you need to instill within your organization. And the goal for simplification should be to minimize the external noise that's entering the organization, because that will be paralyzing to add to organizational complexity. So a little bit of a repeat, but yeah, I'm an advocate that you have to have the right team of specialists in place to act as that outside in filter. And there's a lot of exciting, this is not to diminish all of the exciting innovation. There's so much that can be relevant and inspiration for all of your marketers, but you want to have that small group that can stay on top of the complexity, figure out what comes in, what's ignored, what's maybe exciting, but you want to wait, and deliver that kind of, ruthless prioritization into the organization. To me, I think that's the theme of simplicity that can be instilled not just as a mindset, but how you're actually, building a roadmap and building priorities of what an organization has to do.
I think everyone can see how you have been such a champion for global media excellence and that you have an extraordinary understanding, but you also have a point of view and a vision about how to make this more useful and more relevant. And that's extraordinary in today's world with the amount of noise and complexity. So I truly compliment you. So I thank you and I wish you well. And I hope we continue the conversation because I know that there's a lot of people out there who are really trying to figure out how to simplify. All
Appreciate it, Deborah. It's been a lot of fun to be here. Thanks for taking the time to chat. And yeah, looking forward to seeing some of this through.
right, wonderful. Good to talk to you, Adam.
All right. Thank you.
The Internationalist focuses on the continual reinvention of marketing by highlighting inspirational marketers around the world and their ideas as they move the industry forward. Internationalist Marketing TV shares these perspectives through interviews and personal stories. Thanks so much for watching. If you find this kind of content helpful, please click like or subscribe. Again, thanks so much.